I'm Susan Hood. This tutorial on the Children's Wish Foundation bead is brought to you by Flow Productions and Cranberry Stained Glass and myself. We're going to be making this bead. It has the Children's Wish Foundation logo on one side. On the other side, it has Children's Wish. Now, the first side, we are going to first learn how to do star marini. Secondly, how to put the photo fusing of Children's Wish on the back. And thirdly, the porcelain paint that gives us the shooting stars. I have been teaching this across Canada. A tutorial is also available from susanhooddesigns@gmail.com. I hope you enjoy the different techniques that you will learn today and the processes that will add joy to each child who's granted a wish. This bead was started 4.5 years ago. It took me 6 months to develop it. When we start this bead, we are going to do the star marini. The star marini is outlined in black. So we have a yellow that is going to be outlined. In my tutorial, you will find all of the requirements for the different kinds of glasses that you will be using. It's very simple. There are only 4 different colors of glass, so it really doesn't entail a lot of selection of colors. Right now I'm beginning the middle of the star, that's the yellow part, and I find that I fold the glass over and let it fall. I'm looking for something that looks like a fat cigarette. I use the marver as my third hand. It really does help in shaping it. I have my star marini mold here, and the mold is where I'm going to push the glass into, and I want it really, really hot when I go to put it in, and I want the diameter of my gather, my long cylinder gather, to be the diameter that I can easily slip it into the mold and push down, pull out, and I have the beginning of my star marini. Now, when I have my star marini, I want it to actually be centered. I want to push it very gently and center it on my glass rod. And then I begin covering each face of the star, and I'm going to turn it. You can see the star is there. I'm going to turn it and face each with intense black. Now the intense black has to be the Hades black. The Vitrifont black tends to bleed and the star gets all fuzzy. So I'm going to face each of the sides of the star. Make sure that your gather is large enough to completely go from one end of the star to the other, and hot enough that you can drag it across. I also position my hand on the table, my arm on the table, and that way I'm never cooking my star, but I'm just keeping it in the cooling flame and keeping it warm. The mold that I use is a 5-pointed star. Each time I add glass to the face of the star, I try to make sure that there are no holes. I tend to go toward the middle of the star rather than the apex, because when I'll do the apex later actually. Heat enough that I get a good gather that I can push from one end of the star to the other. And you want to avoid holes. Any holes will be pulled the entire length of your Marini. And now I'm going to reposition my entire gather. I'm going to turn it to the end and you can see the 5 points of the star. Now, the points of the star have to be extended. You want nice, pointy sides. So what I'm going to do is add another row to each of the points of the star. Now the Children's Wish stars are not absolutely perfectly divided evenly like a pentagon, so you don't have to worry about having your points exactly even. Now I'm going to take a pair of smooth tipped tweezers and I'm going to go in and start flattening the face. If these sides aren't absolutely smooth, what will happen is that you will have a wiggly line around the outside of your star. So they do have to be smoothed. What I tend to do is work on one face of the star, then switch over to the opposite side and work on a face over there. That way your gather is always heated throughout and not just heated on one side, so that if the other side cools, of course, this side, that will break off. Don't be in a rush. This does take time. But remember, once you get your star Marini, you will have enough to make maybe 50 beads, depending on the size of your gather, but 40 or 50 beads. And now what I'm going to do is take the points of each star and with the tweezers again go and make very, very pointed thin pieces of the last addition of glass that I put on. And now my punty is getting pretty well sloppy. So what I want to do at this point is punty it up to the other end of my star. You make a large Maria. I use clear glass. You can use white because the outside of this will be white, but I use clear. The whole time, remember to keep your piece, your Marini that you're working on, keep it in the heat. You don't want to cook it, you don't want to change the shape of it, you just want to keep it warm up in the cooling area of the flame. You'll also notice that the star is smaller at one end and graduated to larger at the other. Now, in the Children's Wish bead, the stars are different sizes on each bead, and in the logo it's the same way. So having this graduation allows us to use different parts of the Marini and have different size stars. I'm going to take the Maria and flatten it over on the marver. Then take that and stick it to the end of the Marini. And then remove the other punty. Now, depending on the color of the bead, in this case it's white, I'll put a white coating around it so when the Marini goes into the bead, there's no differentiation between the two, the Marini and the bead itself. I'm going to fill in the valleys first of the star, again making sure I have enough glass that's going to go the entire length of the face of that star. The point of the star here I'm going to cover over. Don't want to lose that definition. I've also got a hole down here. So I'm going to heat that area and actually with my tweezers push in to cover it. Trying to get some molten glass in there is not going to work too well. Other thing is, if your Marini gets too cold and it pops off, don't panic and don't, whatever you do, lose the glass. Just heat a punty, pick it up with your tweezers and stick it back and continue working. Again, I can see there's a hole in there. I'm going to heat that, get lots of heat, and make sure I push down on it and get it all covered. Now at this point, we can look at the end and we can see the star. We can see the beginning of the shape of the star and the white around it. The white in the end will be finished entirely in a round circle around this star. So now we just add and add and add. And at this point, I'm going to give it some heat, making sure that it's heated really deeply into the Marini. Give it a really good soaking with the heat. One thing with Marini, when you start, you're committed to the whole procedure. So make sure that your phone is off. Okay, here's a perfect example where the punty got too cold. I'm just going to stick it right back on. We're going to look at the end, and we haven't gotten close to a circle. This has to be a circle at this point. So I'm looking at it and thinking, I'm going to build in here, and build in around this side. When my glass gets too short, I always use the ends. What I figure is that I spend a lot of money buying the glass, and so I heat up a little end and do continuous feed, the same as a person in a welding shop would do. I just attach the two hot ends and continue on. That way I have very little accumulation of glass that is too short to be used. I'm just about finished because it looks pretty round to me. About as round as we're going to get it. And now at this point, what we're going to do is just smooth off all of the white glass that we added. You can use your torch top marver or brass marver. Any marver will do. And now I'm going to start heating this whole hunk of Marini. I'm not going to punty up the other side yet because I'm going to use a Michael Barley trick. And Michael, when he has a large mass of glass, uses a ladle. And the ladle, if you crank up the heat, your glass can bubble and boil and scum. But with this method, what happens is what leftover heat comes off the flame is actually being reflected back into the bead or the glass, gather, whatever it is. And it gives an even heat from both sides. The trick with using the marver is to make sure that you have it, when you're holding it, you hold it, the ladle, make sure you're holding it at the right angle, because the heat will also reflect back onto your hand. So it's a great tool, but there's a little trick to using it. And we now have to heat the entire gather throughout, because we want it elastic enough that we can pull it. And a lot of times, about now, you find that your punty, it starts to crack. And again, be aware that it can happen. Just make sure you have another punty available that you can whip it out and punty up to whatever end you decide at this point. So it hasn't broken yet, but I can see my punty has a crack in it. So I'm going to start preparing punty for the other side. This punty, when I make the Maria, I want it to be the diameter of the end of my gather. When I make a gather, I try to heat behind the gather rather than at the end. You know that glass is already molten because it's rounded. So what you want to do is get the majority of the flame headed to the cold glass behind the gather. So again, I'm going to use my marver, make my Maria, bring it in, stick it to the end of the Marini, and using my torch top marver, stick it to the end of my Marini. Now at this point, I'm trying to make both punties parallel so that they're one continual line. And that way I can I can move my Marini around in a continuous line. So I've broken off this punty. Remember I said the punty had a crack in it. I knew it was going to happen. It was just a matter of when, but I had anticipated it. So I'm going to, again, take my ladle and start heating this, heating the mass in the middle. I want my punty to be in as close to the center of the star as I possibly can. And it's also really important that all of the white glass is attached to your Maria. So I'm going to go in now. There's a spot there where it's not attached. I want to attach it all to the Maria. So when I pull it, it will pull evenly rather than just the center part being pulled. I do this just by manipulating the glass so it is attached to the Maria all the way around. And again, I use my ladle to start to heat this. I've been giving it a lot of good heat. I'm going to punty up this other end again. I want that as even as I can with the punty in my left hand, so that when I rotate it, I rotate everything evenly. And now we just heat, 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 until you can start to pull it and it feels elastic. You'll also notice that it'll start to glow in the center. It means you're getting the heat right to the core. You don't want it soupy. You want it so it's elastic. And I find when it starts to glow, I start heating toward the sides where the punties are rather than in the middle. The middle is already warm. You don't want to twist unevenly either, because if you do that, your star will become distorted. So make sure you're twisting with the left hand and right hand evenly. It's ready to be pulled. Bring it out of the flame. Start pulling it. When you see the diameter you want, blow on it. That establishes the diameter that we're looking for. And then you just keep pulling. And it'll tell you when it's to stop, because you can't pull it anymore. Make sure you lay it on the surface before you break it. Take your nippers, maybe a good nip on one end, and then don't pick this up. It's hot. Don't pick it up with your tweezers, because you will thermal shock it and break it. And then we're just going to have to wait until it cools down. If I were going to be using the Marini tomorrow, I would put it in the kiln and anneal this. I'm going to be using it today, so I need it. This in half. And you can see the star. There we have our star. When we start this bead, we have to program the eye and the hand to make the cloud. You will be doing this in stringer, but if you haven't got the dimensions correct, it won't work very well. So what you want to do is take a piece of paper with the Children's Wish Foundation on it and keep going over and over and over the cloud. And what you are doing is you're programming your mind and hand to work when you have the caught stringer in your hand. And the more times you go over this, the better your cloud will turn out in the bead. Now you already have your star ready to go. It was your Marini that you made. There are different sizes stars in the logo, And again, we have different size stars depending on the area of the marina that we chose to use. The first thing you want to do is pull a stringer in your Lauscha Aqua. You want your stringer to be about the diameter of a pencil lead. Stringer is ready to go. I need a mandrel. The size I have here is about the size of a large cherry. And then I'm going to mash it. Fire polish off the chill marks. It's necessary to fire off the chill marks because if you don't, when you cool the glass with the mashers, you actually leave a molten core and two cold outer edges. Now, aesthetically, taking the chill marks off is not to make it look pretty, it's to actually even the temperature throughout the glass so you don't create stresses in the glass, which later could become areas where they could break. And then I take my stringer, having practiced over and over again the cloud formation. Okay, now we put on the stars. Plunge the cold Marini into the hot bead. Blow to thermal shock it. And break it off. Take the smaller star. Heat the bead. Plunge the cold Marini in. Blow to thermal shock it. And break it off. There we have our bead with the two stars. That goes in the kiln. After you take the beads out of the kiln, you remove them from the mandrels. Do not clean them. Remove them from the mandrels. And we are now going to put the photo fuse paper, which has the Children's Wish on it, we're going to put that on the back of the bead. Now, the photo fuse paper, you can get it done at a sign shop. Ask around, maybe a stained glass shop will also have it. And when you cut around each piece of logo, you want to get it as close as you possibly can to the printing. You'll find that this does leave a tiny, tiny light line. So the closer you can get to the printing, the better it is. And this is just like the old-time decals. What you want to do is take a decal, place it in some water for about 10-15 seconds, and you can actually begin to slide the decal off of the paper. Slide it off, stick it on the back of your bead. Make sure it's all flattened down. Now we have our bead that is uncleaned and the Children's Wish on the back. Once the decals have dried with the Children's Wish on them, we want to put them onto a small mandrel and load them into the kiln. Now the instructions will be in my tutorial for the timing of the kiln, because these are fired at 1100, which is a little bit less than the torch. And we want to make sure there's a small gap between each bead, because still at 1100 you can get some sticking of the glass. So we want to thread them on. Now remember, these are beads that have not been cleaned, so they still have the bead release in them, so they won't stick to the mandrel. If you forgot and cleaned the beads, you have to dip your mandrels in bead release and then thread them onto the mandrel. Then when those are all added to the kiln, you close your kiln, set your program. Again, that's in the tutorial. The next day they'll be ready. You open them up and all your beads have the Children's Wish logo embedded in that glass. It's there permanently. The last step is to put the shooting part of the star on each of the beads. You've already got the Children's Wish logo on the back. It's all been fired and photo fused onto the glass. Now, I use porcelain paint. It's called Bead, and it's from France. Now, it's when you own one of these, you always store it flat. I don't know why, but it's on the instructions. You store it flat. When you want to use it, you take off the cap and you shake it a few times. And then you draw your shooting star. Now, I tried to do this part with stringer before, but the problem is you have the star there and it would go over the cloud and the line would not be straight. So you want two shooting pieces coming up from your stars. You can see them very clearly on the Children's Wish logo. Now, the wonderful thing about this porcelain paint is if it's a little bit wide, you can always move it with your finger, or you can cut it with a razor blade, and you can manipulate it, or you can just wash it off and start again. If it's not quite thick enough, you give it another go, and then you can manipulate it to get exactly the size you want. Now, once you have this on, this has to cure, and it cures for 24 hours. After it cures, you put it in your kitchen oven, and this is baked on just in your normal everyday oven, and you bake it at 300 degrees. It's all on the package. At 300 degrees for 25 minutes, and then you let it cool, and at that point your beads are finally finished. Now, it takes about 6 days in total for all of the steps, but each of these beads is given to a child who has been granted a wish through the Children's Wish Foundation program. They should not be sold. They should not be given to anyone except those who have been granted a wish by the Children's Wish Foundation. And I ask that you follow that rule, because they're very, very special. They can't be bought. They can't be sold. They must be given. Thank you.